Well, everybody, John Bornschein here, and this is Cable Lane. Today we're talking about a very serious subject, social justice. Now, over the past few weeks, we've been covering some of the issues that divide Christians, such as Christians in government, American exceptionalism. Today we're talking about social justice. So we're not shying away from the tough topics at all, but this is going to require your undivided attention as I work through each of these issues biblically. So let's examine the state of affairs today. We've really come out of now the 20th century. We're now in the 21st century. And as we look back at what has taken place, we are not in this utopian paradise that we were told we would be in. And now there seems to be an ever-present effort to try to move us swiftly towards a new world order, if you will. Over the past few years, we have even witnessed the millions who have been killed in war. The deaths continue to climb in famine. Many are struggling just to find basic necessities for survival. Nations continue to rise against other nations, and no matter how hard we strive, the disenfranchised, the downtrodden, the deprived and oppressed always seem to be amongst us. Yet despite this bleak landscape, the desire for social justice seems to be ingrained in the American spirit. I mean, you look only to the Statue of Liberty, and the following inscription that I'll read to you here in just a moment was originally mounted on the inner wall at the base of the pedestal. It's now in the statue's museum, but listen to these words. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, the tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. These words seem so wonderful, but in a world that is so unfair, what should be done about it? Should government take the steps to redistribute wealth? What action should the church take when it comes to this matter of social justice? And in fact, what does it mean to be an individual given into social justice? What does that terminology mean today? It seems to be ever changing. Now, the words social justice sound great. I mean, really, there's no arguing that. If we look at the definition of social justice, who doesn't want to foster social justice? I mean, the world would seem to be in a better society if we all were given into this idea, if that were terminology were left undefiled. I mean, who, especially as a Christian, wouldn't want something so straightforward as to be given into something of a matter of justice? In fact, we've called it social action or even social ethics or social gospel. Broadly speaking, however, social justice is about determining, maintaining, and administering the rights of individuals. But since so many different kinds of people have adopted the term, it's really difficult to pin down a definition that really expounds on this or helps us to really understand what it's really all about. The term actually goes back to the 1840s. It was coined by a Jesuit priest, Luigi Tarparelli. But today, the terminology has been greatly skewed from where it was originally. Today, social justice seems to be a politicized term to support those supposed rights of even sexually immoral behavior, such as those pressed upon our society by the LGBTQIQ, or government agendas for redistributing wealth to those in poverty, i.e. socialism. Neither of these efforts are biblically supported and are in fact sin. Listen to these terminologies, or at least these viewpoints and perspectives. Michael Novak, he wrote in his article, Defining Social Justice. This is what he says. The trouble with social justice begins with the very meaning of the term. Whole books and treatises have been written about social justice without offering a definition of it. It is allowed to float in the air as if everyone will recognize an instance of it when it appears. This vagueness seems indispensable. John Stuart Mill had this to say, society should treat all equally well who have deserved equally well of it. That is, who have deserved equally well absolutely. This is the highest abstract standard of social and distributive justice, towards which all institutions and the efforts of all virtuous citizens should be made in the utmost degree to converge. So let's talk about social justice and politics, and that's really where this all gets off track. Politically, social justice is often seen as a contrast between liberal and conservative ideologies. There are those who seek to redistribute wealth in order to make society fair, while the latter cry out, noting that free enterprise and capitalism can do just fine without the need for failed socialist or even Marxist ideas. Eric Rush had these scathing words to give us in his article, The Apostasy of Social Justice Christians. Listen to these words. Social justice Christians are those who profess Christianity, but who adhere to politically entrenched concepts of equality and redistribution of wealth. These ideas are ostensibly rooted in their faith, but in truth, they have been incrementally and insidiously insinuated into many American churches by Marxists, progressive politicians, and pastors whose religion has been tainted by the aforementioned parties. I declare that social justice Christianity is apostasy. Its adherents have abandoned their faith for a cause, and their religion has become perfunctory and pretextual. While some are misguided Christians, others are out and out Marxist posers. Those are pretty strong words. Do these words apply to all Christians involved to some degree or another in social justice causes? Let's look at that. Let me first start off with this quote from Gary DeMar. He says this: "In reality, the cry for social justice is a call for the state to do something to fix economic and relational inequities, without any regard to a universal principle of justice. By describing justice in social rather than legal terms, our attention is immediately drawn to national problems that can only be fixed by a civil government with enough power to enforce its policies. So then, advocates of social justice believe that the state plays the major role in rectifying so-called social problems because they are national in scope." The concern that DeMar and others share in this is that the approach the government tends to take is to just throw money at the problem rather than really seeking to understand the underlying issues. They tend to even make the problems worse, creating dependency rather than creating lasting, sustainable reform. In fact, over the past few years, we have seen poverty actually rise to 11.6% despite the efforts to redistribute wealth. Nearly 40 million people are in a state of poverty, and certain policymakers then tend to use that data to manipulate people groups, even manipulate purposes rather than desiring to make real change. That's an issue. Now, let's look at some of the early Christians and how they distributed wealth. We've often heard from Acts chapter 2, verses 44 to 47. That's often cited as a case in point for redistribution of wealth. Let's read it. Here it is on your screen. Acts chapter 2, 44 to 47. "Now all who believed were together and had all things in common, and sold their possessions and goods and divided them among all, as anyone had need. So continuing daily with one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to the church daily those who were being saved." Now, this communal sharing was voluntary in meeting all of these needs within the church. After all, the church was being persecuted on all fronts, and together they were tending to each other to meet each other's needs. This is a far cry from the politically driven socioeconomic Marxism, communism, or even socialism rhetoric that exists in present times, all of which grant citizens the right to possess a large large share of society's burdens, but only share a small part of its benefits. Let's look now at social justice and the Bible. Okay, we need to be careful about confusing social justice with biblical terminology and insights into ethical concepts such as justice in general, because after all, God is about justice. Micah chapter 6 verse 8 tells us to act justly. Listen to this, Micah 6 verse 8. He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And now elements of justice are found in the so-called golden rule that we've even heard spoken by Jesus Christ. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, and Isaiah chapter 1, 16 to 17, we read that we are to seek justice and yes, even defend the oppressed. In Proverbs chapter 31, verses 8 to 9, we are to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves and defend the rights of the poor and needy. Some of my favorites are found in Isaiah chapter 58, verses 6 to 7. Listen to these words. Is this not the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and that you bring to your house the poor who are cast out? When you see the naked, that you cover him, and not hide yourself from your own flesh? How about these powerful words in James chapter 1, verse 27? Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. Given that we are made in God's image, it follows that human beings are of incredible value and worth. You see that in Psalm chapter 139, and therefore we should do what we can to help others who are in need. It doesn't mean, however, that we are to compromise core Christian beliefs in the process or water down the gospel or overemphasize physical needs over salvation or even buy into political philosophies that are strongly laced in socialism or Marxism. And some would strongly argue that are even in direct odds with a Christian worldview. So we need discernment about social justice. And in fact, the Apostle Paul told those in Thessalonica in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10, that the one who is unwilling to work shall not eat. He even told Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 3 to 6, that we were to care for widows, but there were certain stipulations. So Christ really highlights this well for us in Matthew 25, 31 to 40, in which he was talking about the sheep that were commended for their great compassion for those who were in need, the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, those who are naked, sick, or in prison. In caring for those who are in need, the righteous discover that their acts of compassion for the needy are being done as if being done to Christ himself. The Lord wants us to see that Christians are supposed to be compassionate, but not compassionate for the sake of attaining salvation, but because of their salvation. They are given into good works because they are a saved people, because they have the truth, and the truth has set them free. Therefore, they are to be ambassadors for Christ, acting as Christ would act. And so what we find here is that we need a healthy biblical worldview that doesn't compromise our faith in these matters. Listen to what John Wheaton, he's a lawyer, has to say about areas of Christian agreement on social justice matters. Listen to what he says. Recognizing that life can and should be just, though not always fair, Christians can take the lead in church and charitable work and in advocating the careful application of state-sponsored social action. Only Christians can offer the disadvantaged, both in church and society, true love and spiritual healing, and ultimately, only Christians can give God the glory in the process. By doing so, they thus fulfill the law of Christ according to Galatians 6, 2 and 10. I believe then that there are several things on which Christians can agree, no matter where they are on social justice in that spectrum. Number one, God is a God of justice, and He desires us to seek justice as well. Number two, the world will always have people who are in need, and we must do all that we can individually and as a church to help them. Number three, compassion for others should naturally flow from our love for God and for others, not out of legalism or some forced ethical obligation. Let's be reminded of what the Lord told us in Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 to 40. He says to them, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." You see how the order goes there? You have to understand how to love the Lord your God with all of your being. In this, you have a transformed mind, and i.e. then and only then can you truly love your neighbor as yourself. That's the proper order within the sequence of events. You have to change the heart of a man, the mind of a man, that man might be operating differently in society at large. Number four, God has instituted government, but government is not always right. We must obey God rather than men, according to Acts chapter 5, verse 29. Number five, given that there are so many approaches to the definitions of social justice, we must always be discerning. Listen, here's the bottom line, the takeaway for all of this, because we've been highlighting this very sensitive subject matter. We must do what is right biblically, treating people with gentleness, love, and respect, without compromising the truth or the message of the gospel that will truly transform a person from the inside out, according to Romans chapter 12, verse 2. In fact, at the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus addressed the root of sin, the heart condition. If you don't seek to change the hearts and minds of people, then you'll only deal with the surface matters, the outward issues, and there will be no lasting change. But to reach the heart, you must extend a hand. As we feed the hungry, we also will learn to feed the soul so that they hunger and thirst for righteousness. You see, Jesus would feed the masses physically and then spend even more time feeding them spiritually. So as we serve those around us, we will then model the actions of Jesus Christ, tend to the physical need, but more importantly, present the gospel of Jesus Christ. Brothers and sisters, I hope this has been an encouraging video to you, and I want to thank you for listening, for watching Cable Lane today. God bless you, my friends. Take care.